Hey there, everyone. So, I wanted to do a quick video regarding a new prototype that I just built up, and decided that because of how much is involved with it, it'd probably be best just to do a voiceover for it. So, just do a quick show and tell on it real fast here. So, I have created a procedurally generated pseudo-random terrain system with full object placement. And every time that I were to restart this, there's going to be a different terrain configuration, different setup with the trees and bushes and rocks and some of the grass down here, which it could probably be a little bit better, but have all these different elements being added in and different height mapping and what have you. So I just wanted to go through and do a quick show on this. Basically, we'll start at the beginning here. It's running off of Perlin Noise, and I have a little map preview that I can run with here just to show things off and be able to change things and see it in the inspector here. So I'm running off of Perlin Noise to actually generate these different terrains. I've implemented a level of detail system as well for future infinite terrain type configurations. Right now it's just a single panel that it builds up, but it's using Perlin Noise to actually create the different terrain objects here. And I've got it actually built up in some scriptable objects, so I can just create new noise settings, go through texture settings so I can configure all the textures and how they'll actually line up, configure the meshes, the height maps, and how those are going to work out, and then the actual terrain object placement. And I'll kind of show off a little bit of that as well. So the script itself, every time that you hit play, it's going to regenerate a new noise map, and that noise map is actually going to have a different seed between negative int int min val to int max val as the actual seed object that it puts in there. And then it's also going to randomize the offset that is implemented within. And I can kind of show off just a little bit of how that would actually work with this here. This is the default noise settings that I actually have applied to the map preview here, and as well as the map generator itself. I have an infinite setting here, but I'm not going to be using it yet. It hasn't been fully implemented. So with this here, I can go in and actually change the seed and be able to have all these different maps be generated. I can also take the offset and move it around and throw it into like 500. And this seed now, I've got a completely different map than I did before. Do the same thing here, new map, and the offsets themselves and the seed are all randomly implemented. Every time that you hit play, it's going to change those values, and you can see that it'll just populate with a different type of map each and every time. Now I've also added in the height map configuration, and this height curve is going to be used for kind of flattening out this brown area here, which is actually for the water elements. Right now it's like this, so I can actually hit this guy and just pop him in, and now you've got this pretty looking water. But so this particular height map here, I have this height multiplier, and as I adjust this height multiplier between different values, I can bring this up to say 100. And everything gets a little bit bigger and a little bit more bumpy and what have you. And I can adjust the bump based off of these noise settings here, and Yeah, let's create a new one here. Noise settings, global. I'm going to go ahead and pop this guy onto the map preview. And right in there. Alright, so you can see it's really, really ugly when it's like that. But what I can do is I can actually change, say, the number of octaves used. So, I want 1 octave that'll actually do this. Hit auto update, and there you go. So 1 octave now has that. I add in a 2nd octave, it'll increase the detail mapping behind it. 6 is usually what I find is a good level to have. The lacunarity here will actually configure the amount of bump that is involved and how kind of separated out things are. I have the scale here, which I can scale up to be really big and make it look like it's actual kind of a really decent terrain, or I can drop it down, half size and have it where it's more like if you were playing a Civilization type game, you'd be able to set it up like this. And set up the persistence here, so lower values mean that it has lower bump values that are actually involved. So each one of these octaves is actually affected by the lacunarity and the persistence value. So as I raise this up, the amount of bump that comes through per octave will actually increase. So I can just make whatever changes I want, and then I can go through and say I want a different seed here, and bump this to say 80, and you get these very interesting looking maps that are actually built out in all different ways, and you can kind of affect how you're actually going to have them look. And kind of the cool thing is that I can then go, well, I like this map better, so I'm just gonna pop that in there, and there you go. You now have that. Go ahead and get rid of that. The mesh settings themselves, I have flat shading built into it. I don't necessarily like flat shading, but it is something that I can work with. So I'm going to do that and have it where it has the flat shaded type of look, and depending on if you want to do textures or if you want to have it where it's color mapped instead, you can run with that. And I can adjust how big this actually is, which will actually work with the level of detail maps. Don't really like flat shading too terribly much, but that's just a personal preference. I can even change the scale of the mesh itself, so I can adjust just how much of that mesh actually gets generated with each pass. Scale that down. If I do this, it'll scale it uniformly across the entire thing, so it's the exact same map, but it just scales out. And then there's the object placement information. And, actually, let's go into the texture info first. So the texture info is just a collection of different textures that you put into place, and you can change these out with different what-haves use. And then you can change the strength of the color tint that you actually have applied. So like if I go to some of the sand here, if I were to get rid of all of the tint strength, this is just the default texture. This is what's coming through in that particular texture. I can increase that and give it a little bit more vibrancy. I can bring it up to where it's just straight up colored to that tint that I've set. Put it back in there. You can set up the start height for it, so I can make it to where it'll go all the way down into the mud, or if I want to, I can have it where it'll just go away completely. And I can just kind of do readjustments on it, and this is a scriptable object as well, so I can always just make a new one and pop it in if I want to. I've got blend strength here, so you can turn it all the way off and have very hard lines, or I can blend it all together and make it to where you completely lose kind of the differentiation between the different textures and what have you. So I like putting it at kind of a low level here, so it blends, but it's not like overly out there. I can adjust the scale of the texture that's applied as well, so I can drop that to 1 and have it where it's bring these guys down. Come on, you can do it. There we go. So you have this texture here, and as I scale this up, you can see that the texture will get bigger and get more kind of prevalent. So you can kind of see a little bit more of what's actually going on in the texture build itself, and blend things together to make it look better with the world that's in it, and bring up the tint color a little bit and give it some more of that colorful vibrancy behind it. And you can have as many different elements as you want, up to I think 10. Might be higher than that, but you can add in as many as you want in there. And the terrain types here are just for future iterations on the game project that I'm working on here. So, and then lastly, we have the actual object placement. Now I need to do some adjustments on how this is all laid out, because minimum height, minimum size, maximum size. You don't necessarily need this every time, particularly if the checkboxes aren't checked, and having it where it's a kind of a double handle slider. But what this will do is you can have the likelihood of the placement, and it is just straight up the percentage chance. So the higher the number, the higher the percentage or the higher the chance that an object will actually be placed at any particular vertex. The minimum height is how low in the world it'll actually try and place. So I can have this set to where any object will go deep into the mud, or I can have it where any object will go all the way up to the top of whatever mountain is around. I can randomize the rotation, randomize the size, and this is just on the y-axis, so it'll just rotate 0 to 360 at a random turning radius. The randomized size, I have a minimum, maximum, minimum down to 0.5, maximum up to 2. I can adjust that later and maybe make it a little bit wider of a scale. Angle to world will actually use the normal mapping that's applied to all of the textures here and all of the meshes to actually angle on the X and Z axes to the world that it's actually attached to. And then I have a little button here that will allow me to turn on Perlin noise. Without turning that on, it is a fully randomized, true pseudo-random generation where it'll just pop in objects kind of just sparingly throughout the world, depending on what your different configurations are up to that point. But otherwise, you can use the Perlin noise, which will then do much the same as it does with the terrain building, and give you those different maximum min type number associations. And then you can set what values you actually want for that for each one of these items that actually exists in here. And when you actually set it up, you want to throw in this noise setting, which is this guy here. And it's exactly the same as the noise setting that's used for the terrain. It's just a separate noise entity, because it also does a randomization on the seed and the offset. So every time that I go and hit play on this, it's gonna completely regenerate and re-randomize what's going on. So you'll see that I've got all of these trees that are just kind of sparingly placed throughout, and looks mostly natural. If I were to go over to this guy here and say go down to this tree here, turn that off, now it will be placed throughout very non-sparingly. So it goes through and it figures out exactly where it wants to actually place all these different objects and kind of runs with it. And you can see that it's got the different rotations, and it gets planted onto the ground, and you got these different sizes and shapes to how everything's being placed. It works fairly well. Everything that I have in here, all of the actual calculations being done to determine how this is actually, how the noise is going to be generated, how the mesh is going to be built out, how all of the objects are going to be placed, are all in their own static scripts, their own static classes. So I can go through and actually thread all of those and make it to where, as I see fit later on down the line, I can actually create an infinite terrain that's fully threaded and have it where it adjusts level of detail based off of the player's distance from the different objects that exist there, and having it go through that thread just makes it run so much smoother. That's kind of a future iteration. I had it running at one point and had to shut it down when I went through and did some refactoring, but yeah, so that's kind of what I've been running through, and really happy with the overall outcome of it. And adding in the water just makes it look that much prettier. I had the play here, and there you go, kind of a jungle scene going on. But yeah, so that's it. Thanks, everybody.